Hey, are you interested in playing the official Touhou games? The TouhouProject is a series that I think is somewhat hard to get into at first. It's very difficult figuring out where to start when getting into the official Touhou media because of how much fan-made content there is out there that 9 times out of 10 is more popular than the official stuff. Add on to that how intimidating bullet hell games look at first glance, and the sheer amount of solely official Touhou media that exists with 19 mainline games, 13 spin-offs, and a ton of books and manga. With this video, I will hopefully be able to help you overcome these barriers of entry, and maybe help you get into this rabbit hole in the process. Hi, Kanonical here, and today I'm here to tell you which official games in the TouhouProject I personally think are the best entryway into the series. Before we start, I have to preface that almost none of these games have official English translations. You will have to patch the games yourself with THCap for a fan-made English translation. It's not too hard to do, but I do understand that patching games is intimidating to say the least, especially if you're not tech-savvy and are not used to PC games. Touhou was one of the first PC games I ever played as well, and I was definitely intimidated too, but by using tutorials and such, it's not as hard as you might imagine it to be. You might think the best game to start off with would be Touhou Komakyo, the embodiment of Scarlet Double, the 6th mainline game in the series, since it's the most popular one, the first game that takes place in the current Windows era canon, and the game a lot of people, including me, started off with, but I couldn't disagree more. Embodiment of Scarlet Double, while theoretically being one of the simplest games in the entire series with no gimmicks whatsoever, is pretty hard, feels okay to play without a visible hitbox, is probably the most RNG dependent game in the series, and has what I personally think is some of the worst dialogue in the entire series. While it's not the worst option since it does have some aspects that can be more welcoming to new players, such as customizable lives, and the fact that the game is pretty basic, but there are better options to start with. Especially because the very next game after Embodiment of Scarlet Double is much more beginner friendly. You would have to be pretty dedicated to the series already if you're picking Embodiment of Scarlet Double as your first game. Also, Embodiment of Scarlet Double doesn't even run properly on modern PCs anyways, so good luck getting it to work if you do end up picking this game as your first. The best entryway into the series, in my personal opinion, would be Touhou Yoyomu Perfect Cherry Blossom, the 7th mainline game in the series. Perfect Cherry Blossom is one of the easiest entries in the series. The game throws at you a lot of lives and bombs, especially if you play as the Sakuya A-shot type, as well as letting you customize how many lives you start off with, which those two aspects combined let you get away with a lot more mistakes compared to the other entries in the series. While there is a gimmick in this game, and gimmicks are pretty intrusive a lot of the time in Touhou games, Perfect Cherry Blossom's gimmick is unobtrusive and actually benefits the player. This game's gimmick, the cherry border, basically amounts to giving you a free hit or a free screen clear from time to time, so it only benefits the player, and lets you get away with even more mistakes. It's also the first game to have a visible hitbox, which helps a lot when dodging precisely. Another reason why I would recommend Perfect Cherry Blossom to newcomers is because it was the first Touhou game where Zun actually started to care about the story, world building, and lore. Before this game, the characters felt like video game characters with somewhat binary personalities, but from this game onward, Gensoku feels more like a believable, living, breathing world. Perfect Cherry Blossom, in my personal opinion, also integrates its story into gameplay much better than any other mainline game in the series. I'm not going to go into any details about the story itself because I don't want to spoil anything in a video aimed at newcomers, so go play the game yourself to find out. All in all, Perfect Cherry Blossom is the most forgiving game in the Touhou series with one of the best stories in the entire series, and is an excellent game to start off with. You might be wondering why this video even exists if there's such a perfect starting point, but there is one big setback with Perfect Cherry Blossom, and it isn't really the game's fault. It's how inaccessible the game is. Touhou 6 Komakyo, the embodiment of Scarlet Double, Touhou 7 Yoyomu Perfect Cherry Blossom, and Touhou 8 Eiyasho Imperishable Night have never been digitally available. You either have to physically own the game or search the 7 seas looking for it. This game would have honestly been the no-brainer answer if it was on a digital storefront like Steam, but it's not, and I don't think it will ever be since Zun, I assume, probably doesn't have the source code for it anymore. All we can hope for is it digitally getting re-released someday. Also, all the games before Subterranean Randomism, the 11th mainline game, have very tiny window sizes, so you might want to patch the game with the Program V patch for a bigger window. The games aren't unplayable in the tiny window, I actually have it for the game I'm going to talk about next, but it is pretty frustrating, so I do recommend patching the games. A good entryway Touhou game that is actually available digitally is Touhou Fujinoku Mountain of Faith, the 10th mainline game of the series. Mountain of Faith is also one of the easiest games in the series, but it isn't as lenient as Perfect Cherry Blossom. This game is one of the simplest games in the series. You could argue it's simpler than even embodiment of Scarlet Double. It does have a gimmick, but it's completely tied to score attack and doesn't affect a casual playthrough basically whatsoever. While the game doesn't give you too many lives, and it removed adjusting starting lives for the rest of the series after it as well, in place of that, the game gives you a whole crap ton of bombs. Honestly, Mountain of Faith isn't that easy until you discover how overpowered bombing is in this game. They visually look very unimpressive compared to every other game in the series, but they are pretty busted in this game, and the game gives you quite a lot of them. You might just win by bombing through a lot of the second half of the game. They're really strong in this game. The game does have one issue though, and that's its continue system. See, most other Touhou games have limited continues, 3 to 5 usually, and you get to resume wherever you game overed. But in Mountain of Faith, you have unlimited continues, but they start you off at the beginning of the stage with 2 lives and 4 power. This is absolutely brutal for a newcomer, especially in the second half of the game, or so I've heard. I don't actually know because I've never used the continue in Mountain of Faith, since I've always preferred to play without them. I've just heard a lot of traumatic horror stories about the waterfall, stumping every beginner that came in its path. So yeah, warning you just in case. Also, as previously stated, this game's window size is puny, and there's no way to change it, even in the Steam version, unless you patch it. You don't necessarily have to, considering I haven't, and I have 40 hours of playtime and a hard 1 credit clear in this game, but it's very much recommended if you don't want to be squinting the entire time. Those were the 2 most obvious choices for Entryway official Touhou games, and I do recommend starting with either Perfect Cherry Blossom or Mountain of Faith, but it wouldn't be that interesting of a video if it stopped here, would it? I'm going to now talk about some more unique official Touhou games that I think could still work as an entryway into the series. Touhou Eisho Imperishable Night, the 8th mainline game of the series, is a very beginner-friendly game, to the point where you might be wondering why I didn't talk about it alongside the previous 2 games, but I do have a reason for it. The game's too good. So good, in fact, that you might get disappointed by every other Touhou game you play after it. Imperishable Night is objectively the best game of the series, and it's not even close. The game's the most polished in the series, it has the most content out of any game in the series with 2 different stage 4s and 6s, it has an interesting story, and it actually has a completion objective with last words, which basically are achievements, but you unlock a special challenging spell card every time you clear an objective, which is unlike basically every other game in the series. Imperishable Night is the most complete package out of any of the mainline games. If you're only willing to play one singular game of the series, or only have time for one, it should be Imperishable Night. Imperishable Night has basically all the pros and cons Perfect Cherry Blossom had going for it, except it's a little harder and less lenient. The game doesn't give you as many lives throughout the game compared to Perfect Cherry Blossom, but as a trade-off, you can increase your starting lives even more than you could in that game. One drawback the game does have that makes it a little less accessible to newcomers is its unique continue system. See, Imperishable Night has a time system that starts at 11 PM, and the game forcefully ends at 5 AM. Each stage takes 1 hour, and every time you continue, 30 minutes gets added onto the clock. You can reduce the time a stage takes to beat by 30 minutes by activating the boss's last spell, which requires you to reach a certain time orb threshold. To beat that threshold, you're basically required to not get hit or bomb. So while you can technically continue as many times as you want until you hit 5 PM, a beginner is realistically only going to have 1 continue if they want to actually beat the game. That's pretty severe if you're going for an ordinary clear. Imperishable Night is more fit to be the 2nd or 3rd game you play, not the 1st. The next game is probably the most unique game of the series, Touhou Koryudo Unconnected Marketeers, the 18th mainline game of the series. Unconnected Marketeers, difficulty-wise, is actually somewhat hard, but I think it might be worth starting with this one just solely on how unique of an entry it is. I don't think there's anything like it. Unconnected Marketeers is a bullet hell fused with a roguelite, and it's really fun. If you're into roguelites, Unconnected Marketeers might be a really good hook to get you into the series. An additional reason why I would recommend Unconnected Marketeers as a starting point is because of how much variety the game has. You can purchase one of a random set of cards at the end of a stage, and they wildly vary in effect. There are some cards that give you an additional attack, some that block incoming bullets, others that act like the gimmicks from the past games, and one that just spawns the mid-boss Lily White because why not, I guess. There are many other cards that I haven't mentioned, so many that each run will feel unique from the last. Repetitiveness is something most of the other Touhou games struggle with to a certain extent, so this fact alone makes Unconnected Marketeers more approachable. Also, since Unconnected Marketeers is a much more modern entry in the series from the 2020s, you don't really have to worry about the game not working on modern PCs anytime soon. There is one small issue though if you're playing on controller in any official bullet hell Touhou game made after 2019, and it's the fact that the stick dead zones are all out of whack. This doesn't matter whatsoever if you either play games on a keyboard or a D-pad, which most people who play Touhou do. But if you're like me, and like playing on a control stick, you're kinda tough out of luck. So if you're a stick player, you either have to suck it up and play on the slippery stick that does not feel good to play on, or go through the pain of figuring out how to disable native controller compatibility and use an external app for it instead. It sucks since Unconnected Marketeers is one of my favorite games of the series, and this is the only big issue I have with the game. I would honestly just recommend this game to newcomers just based on the fun factor alone. So TLDR, when it comes to the mainline Touhou games, play Touhou 7 Yo-Yomu Prayer Cherry Blossom, and if you can't get access to that game, play Touhou 10 Fujin Roku Mountain of Faith. You could also try out Touhou 18 Koryudo Unconnected Marketeers if you're into roguelites, or are the type who's interested in more unique types of games. And Touhou 8 ASO Imperishable Night if you only want to play one game of the series, and want to see everything the series has to offer in one complete singular package. While there are plenty of games and media I didn't have time to talk about that could be considered beginner-friendly, the games I talked about today are what I think to be the best entryway into the official Touhou series. I hope at least one of these games has caught your interest and convinced you to join this rabbit hole with us. I expect to see you again on a deeper layer next time. Bye!